I would like to welcome everybody to our workshop this afternoon. We are on day 3, workshop 2, so about halfway through our sessions, and I have to tell you, every session I attend, I think is the best session of the summit so far. So I'm really excited to hear from Madison and Christy here in just a few minutes. For those of you who have heard this before, I apologize, but for our new folks, this is the 10th annual Summit on Volunteerism and Civic Engagement. And like most things nowadays, we have shifted to a virtual platform, and it is our first time hosting virtual events, and I think it's going pretty well so far. Of course, with any event, I think what really makes it are our fabulous speakers and our wonderful attendees who are coming together to share a little bit about the really cool projects that are going on, and then also looking for those opportunities to connect and advance initiatives in our own towns and cities, as well as in our state. I would like to now introduce Madison Rock and Christy Tate from the Center for the Future of Arizona. Madison is a native Arizonan and self-described cheerleader for democracy. I love that. She is passionate about guiding young people through the process of self-empowerment, innovative problem solving, and developing strong, resilient communities. As the Senior Civic Health Program Coordinator, say that 5 times fast, at the Center for the Future of Arizona, she supports strategies and initiatives to improve Arizona's civic health, including the school participatory budgeting program, where students learn democracy by doing, by actually making decisions over a portion of the district's budget. Madison has been deeply engaged with the Phoenix Union SPB, school participatory budgeting process, since its early adoption and has supported its scale to district-wide expansion. Madison has helped seed and support SPB processes in Chandler Unified, Sunnyside Unified, Queen Creek Unified, and also at Carson Junior High. She also serves as a global mentor on school PB in the Rising Stars PB Mentorship Program. Madison graduated from Arizona State University with a bachelor's degree in public service and public policy. Her area of study focuses on sustainability, creative city development, and participatory budgeting. Welcome, Madison. We also have with us today Christy Tate, the Director of Civic Health Initiatives at the Center for the Future of Arizona. Let me mute someone real quick. Christy leads a portfolio of work that drives data, dialogue, and action statewide to improve the civic health in Arizona. She served in leadership roles spanning organizations focused on education, service, and civic engagement. So she's certainly speaking at the right summit. She has, most recently, Christy served in the National Conference on Citizenship, a congressionally chartered organization dedicated to strengthening civic life in America. Her focus at NCOC was on developing and leading partnerships for the Civic Health Index, which creates reports and initiatives designed to strengthen civic life in communities across the country. Before joining NCOC, she served at Georgetown University's Center for Social Justice as director of the DC Schools Project. She also has directed programs for Hands on Greater Phoenix and the Boys and Girls Club of Boston Charleston Clubhouse. She has a BA from the University of Notre Dame and Master of Arts in Liberal Studies degree from Georgetown University with a focus on social and public policy. Welcome to Christy and Madison, and I will turn the time over to both of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm welcome. And as Emily just shared, this really is my favorite audience to be with today, my favorite community to be with today. I have a really deep passion for volunteerism and service and have worked in that really throughout my whole career. So Madison and I are both really thrilled to have the chance to connect with you all and share a little bit about the work that we're doing and hopefully find ways to collaborate with some of you today. I'm going to start off just by sharing a little bit of context about our work at the center and our approach to what we call civic health that really grounds this participatory budgeting model in schools and why we've gotten so invested in that project. We will have a couple of opportunities for polls and discussion throughout the presentation, but please add questions or comments in the chat as we go. We would love to hear from you and kind of really make this as interactive as possible and have more of a discussion throughout the presentation. For those of you who don't know us at the center, we're a nonprofit. We're based in Phoenix, but really with this statewide mission. So exciting to see folks from across the state are here today. We're really focused on building that brighter, stronger future for Arizona. And we do that in a few key areas. One is that we listen to Arizonans first to understand what are the shared concerns, what are our shared aspirations for the future of the state, what do we all kind of have in common for what we want for our communities. We're really focused on bringing data then to understand and track how are we doing in those issues, and ultimately working alongside partners to bring new tools and practices to really advance solutions on some of those concerns. So this work has been guided by a vision that we call the Arizona we want. It's been developed through years of ongoing dialogue with communities across the state. It started with a poll with the Gallup organization, which we have just actually been able to refresh in the past year and are releasing results soon. It's continued with surveys and focus groups and really community conversations across the state to understand what are our shared values in our communities, what are the things that we all want for our state, and how we use that to develop kind of a roadmap for the future. But ultimately over time for us, what became really critical was not only to understand what those shared priorities were, but how we were doing on those issues. So the center has worked with other partners across the state to develop what we call our progress meters. And they're really a set of data and tools to benchmark and track how are we doing in each of these key issues for the future success of the state. So many of you might know our work in Education Progress Meter in partnership with Expect More Arizona provides that long-term kind of comprehensive look at how we're doing in education from early childhood learning through post-secondary attainment. And we've developed these metrics and this set of data in each of these other issue areas to help benchmark, track, and use data ultimately to inform strategy. So that brings us to these two pillars at the bottom, civic participation and connected communities, and why we're here with you all today and what really drives our work for Madison and I. We've really embraced these two issues coming from Arizonans as key pillars and hearing time and time again, these are on our minds, these matter to us, we know that they need strengthening across the state. And we've embraced this idea of civic health. So really the broader understanding of what are the ways that we engage in civic and community life that really are about our ability to define and address tough challenges and public problems. So we've embraced this kind of broader notion of civic life and civic health at the center. And that really brings us and informs the work that we're doing in participatory budgeting, which we'll share more about today. So before we go much further, we wanted to stop and have a quick poll exercise. So if you'll bear with us, we hope the technology works in our favor today. We're curious for this group, knowing you all are in this work every day with us in civic life, civic engagement, volunteerism. What do you think is the top issue of concern today facing civic life in Arizona? So if you had to pick one issue, what would you say is kind of on your mind today confronting us? So to do this, you'll go to the link either in your browser or you can do it on your phone by text at the top, and we'll put it in the chat as well. It should populate the question. You just enter a response and we'll see the responses as they come in. We'll do sort of a word cloud to get a feel for what is on your minds today. So we'll stop for a minute. Feel free to unmute if you have a question or enter it in the chat if it's not working for you. But again, visit that link Madison just dropped in the chat. Should prompt you to enter what's on your mind, top concern facing civic life in Arizona. Thank you, and we're getting a couple of responses in the chat too, which is great. We can add those into the poll. So we'll give you all just a minute to enter some responses. Absolutely. So we're seeing in the chat and in the poll issues around education, access, hunger, homelessness, poverty, technology, lack of funding for education. This is great. You can feel free to keep adding to the chat too. We just want to get some discussion going around what's top of mind today. Climate inequalities. Great, thank you. So this gives us kind of a picture. We always like to do this at the beginning of our discussions to understand sort of what's top of mind today, what are we bringing into the discussion. We'll share a little bit of our data in the civic life and civic health progress meters before we really jump into the inclusive participatory budgeting model to help demonstrate for us why we found it to be such a high impact and really critical tool for Arizona. So to give you that overview of what we are measuring in terms of data and civic life, we have data provided through a national organization that has a really great look at Arizona in a detailed way on a number of different indicators. We're really excited. We just launched a partnership with the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at the Flynn Foundation to really bring partners together around this data to explore and understand what are some of our strengths and assets in civic life in Arizona and where are there opportunities to improve. So that's work that's really just now emerging. Just to give you a quick feel, we're looking at everything from voter turnout in Arizona, but also other ways of expressing political views, social views like using purchasing power, boycotting or boycotting based on your values, reaching out to contact elected officials, talking about politics with family and friends. If we look at this other set around connected communities, we're also really interested in the broad set of ways that Arizonans engaged in community life. So volunteerism being really critical, charitable giving, but also some of the neighborhood engagement. What are ways that folks either spend time or help their neighbors, help their family and friends? And when we look at some of the Arizona data, it's interesting to see we have a couple of really strong assets here and then a couple of challenges. So in civic participation, something that we've been really inspired by is to understand whether or not Arizonans really believe that their vote will make an impact. So we can skip to that next one, Madison. Thank you. So we have a couple of slides here to show, or a couple of data points rather in this slide. The first just looks at turnout of registered voters. So you see from the midterms alone, 2014 to 2018, that significant increase. We know in the 2020 presidential, we had about 80% of registered voters participate. So increasing turnout being really promising over time. But this other chart here shows you whether folks who didn't vote felt like their vote would matter. So that's asked after the presidential or midterm election to say, if you didn't participate, why? And some people say, I wasn't able to get to the polls, I wasn't registered, I didn't have the right information. But many respond that they didn't think their vote would matter, so they didn't participate. In Arizona, in the 2016 election, we were higher than the national average for that concern. But as you can see, going to 2018, that actually had dropped for Arizona below the national. So we'll find out coming off the 2020 if that trend had continued. But some improvement there for Arizonans feeling like their vote, would matter. And then when you look at the connected communities data, we also see a couple of interesting points for Arizona. In helping family and friends, that's one of our assets. We're above the national averages and really are connected and supporting each other in that way. But in spending time with neighbors, we're actually ranked last. This was the 2017 data that continued into the 2019 data, and by a pretty significant amount in terms of spending that time with neighbors. So part of why we share all this information and give you a little bit of this data at the front of the discussion is because this has been really critical for us as a center, as an organization, to get involved in the participatory budgeting work here in Arizona to understand. We know that there are some significant gaps and opportunities in our civic life and civic engagement. We know that age and education are often correlated with how engaged folks are in the voting process, in advocacy, in their communities. So what are the opportunities to really prepare young people to be active, engaged civic participants for the long term? And that's directly where participatory budgeting comes in. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Madison, who's really going to walk you through this model that we've been developing in partnership with others, and share what we've been learning and kind of some of the impact we've seen along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Christy. So school participatory budgeting, or school PB or SPB, depending on how we are describing it, is an innovative civic learning tool that's really designed to build student agency, collaboration, critical thinking skills, while also creating those pathways for continued engagement in civic life for the long term. The school PB model stems from the widely adopted municipal level PB model that was founded in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989, but has since grown to about 11,000 processes all over the globe. And again, that really culminates or shows up mainly in the municipal level with that type of PB. But in Arizona, school PB is just a new way of learning for students to really learn democracy by deciding how school district funds are used to improve their school. So in 2016, Phoenix Union became the first school district in the nation to pilot this model with school district dollars. But really, regardless of the setting that PB is implemented in, it happens in 5 key phases. So at the outset of the process, decision makers come together, they allocate a portion of the budget, they create the timeline, kind of work out all of those logistical aspects, and they also recruit community members, or in our case, students, to form what's called a steering committee that really helps to shepherd the process along. That steering committee goes out, they collect ideas from the rest of the students on their campus about how they want to spend the dollars. And then top ideas are transformed into eligible project proposals using parameters of feasibility and eligibility that are set out by the district at the outset of the process. Once those final projects have been decided upon, the entire school community comes back together to decide which project they want to see funded on their campus. And then ultimately, the project that wins that community vote is funded and implemented. The process is then evaluated for the next cycle by the participants, the students in that work, so that it can be improved for the next academic year. But to add a little bit more texture to this process, we're going to watch a quick video from the pilot year with Phoenix Union in 2016. And as we go through the presentation, you'll notice that some of these numbers that are presented in the video are a little bit outdated, but I'll be sure to tell you where we are with the work now in 2021. So if you don't mind giving me a thumbs up in the chat or with your reactions that you can hear the video while we watch this video, I would appreciate that.
If you live in any community or you go to school in any place, you should be able to have a say in how to spend the money that affects your life.
What are the real needs of the community? If you only have a certain amount of money, what is it that you can do that's going to benefit as many people as possible?
Phoenix Union was the first school-based program to be initiated, and we were wondering how will this work in the school community, and it's worked beautifully.
It empowers the students and it teaches them about the importance of civic engagement in a way that will actually impact them.
We're implementing a project that we call Participatory Budgeting.
That's done by splitting up and coming up with ideas.
Each grade level had 50 ideas, and then we had to take all 50 ideas from each grade level and then make them smaller.
And then you present those ideas to the students.
And from there, we made proposals. And then now we have people voting on which project they want to see new here.
The students are going to be the ones that are going to be deciding this, not the teachers.
You're going to be able to see a change that the whole school is actually deciding on.
Seeing everybody come together and participate in this one thing that is going to benefit them and our school as a whole was exciting to see.
Participatory budgeting is not only an investment in the school, but it's an investment in our students' critical thinking, communication, problem solving abilities, and their buy-in and ownership of the school.
If the students as a whole decide on what the school gets to be or what it gets to have, it's much more empowering to the student. It's like they have control over what environment they're raised in.
Sometimes we don't even have a voice, we don't have a say in anything, so this honestly does help.
This is actually my first time that I've ever voted in something.
It makes people want to be better advocates for themselves and not having that hesitancy to say what you want because it's your community.
I ended up voting for the water project.
A garden,
the musical instruments,
the fitness,
the shade, the art supplies, the audio and visual one.
Thanks for voting.
Thanks for voting.
We want future Americans to be engaged and make sure that they're able not just to make choices and have opinions, but actually go and do the democracy.
And an informed vote counts for a lot. And I think having an opportunity to start practicing that now in a positive change that you see on campus, it's proof of concept for a lot of people.
It's made me think about being a citizen, and so working with other people and getting their ideas really expands my mindset.
When I get older, I still want to be seeing what's wrong with my community, coming up with ways to fix it, and then acting upon it. That's what I like doing. I just never really gotten the chance to act upon it till now because of PVP. With this experience, I can go much higher, possibly even the government, to do bigger projects that is not just in a school or a community, but possibly the whole city.
And if our job is to create great young men and young women, the PB process, in our opinion, it's a no-brainer.
So I was a little bit nervous, not understanding how we would make this work in a school setting, but the guidance that's provided through Participatory Budget Project really made this easy.
PB's process is really important and kind of easy and practical for every high school.
It happens in cities, it happens in districts, it happens in public housing.
Anybody across the country, across the world could probably do PB really easily.
All right, so as I mentioned earlier, PB has really grown significantly in Arizona since that video was shot in 2016. We're now reaching upwards of 50,000 students in 39 campuses across 5 school districts in Arizona on an annual basis. Those school districts include Phoenix Union, Chandler Unified, Carson Junior High and Mesa Public Schools, Queen Creek Unified, and also Sunnyside Unified down in Tucson, Arizona. Through partnerships with local voter engagement organizations and electoral institutions as well, we've also registered about 4,500 new voters for future Arizona elections since 2016 on those school PB vote days. Which is really exciting when we're thinking about, long-term impact in terms of civic life and civic health in Arizona. Not including this year's investments, there's been nearly $500,000 that's been allocated to school PB that's funded over 65 student-led campus improvement projects. Some of the different projects that have been funded are very Arizona, shade structures, water filtration systems. There's also a lot of school spirit projects that come forward, like murals on campus, new mascot, costumes, statues, also really practical items like bathroom and cafeteria improvements. And interestingly, some social emotional learning projects like a school therapy dog, which I'll talk a little bit about, and meditation rooms and so forth. But the PB process really provides meaning opportunities for students to build their civic skills, their attitudes, their dispositions, like problem solving and teamwork and collaboration. It builds trust and community among teachers, students, importantly, and administrators on campus as well. And importantly, PB is important to our state's future and improves our civic health across Arizona because it really creates this pipeline of young people who have the building blocks for lifelong civic engagement. So this year, I'm sure it comes at no surprise that PB implementation has looked a little bit different than what it has in typical years, but we're really excited that all of our district partners are still actively implementing the PB model in this academic year. we've been working really closely with our school district partners to adapt the model so it can really meet them where they are. So if that's figuring out what an online or virtual engagement platform that works best for that school or that district, we're working alongside them to do that. Or if it's implementing the process in a hybrid manner where students in the classroom have opportunities to contribute, but also students online have those meaningful opportunities as well. We're really working with them to adapt the model so that it meets folks where they are at. And this year, we've also seen the process take on new focuses and expanded focuses. So we were really excited that the initial partner on this work, Phoenix Union, announced a huge expansion of really embodying PB as a decision-making tool for their district, and they've allocated $1.2 million over the next 3 years to reimagine what school safety looks like on all 20 of their high school campuses using the participatory budgeting model. And they'll be engaging teachers, students, and community members in that process as well, which is a really exciting kind of new way to be using school participatory budgeting. And we've also had the opportunity to really deepen our focus and commitment to inclusivity in the process, which is what I'm here to talk a little bit more in detail about today. So through partnerships with the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, or ADDPC, and ASU Participatory Governance Initiative, or PGI, the inclusive process focuses on engaging students really meaningfully and intentionally, students with disabilities, in every phase of the PB process. The data further points to this focus as a critical need for improving civic life throughout our state. We know from prior research that people with disabilities are less likely to be civically engaged, and that youth who have the opportunities for civic engagement in schools are more likely to engage in civic and political life as adults. So in this context, there's really concerning implications that arise when students with disabilities are often underrepresented in leadership spaces on campus that promote civic engagement, like student government and civic-oriented school clubs. So these findings, along with the data in the Civic Health Progress Meters that Christy described, have really served as the foundation for the Inclusive School PB project and become even more critical in this context of the pandemic and subsequent shift to distance learning, which has created new challenges for students with disabilities and the broader student body to really come together and have that sense of community. So one thing that's important to note is that the PB process in and of itself is inherently inclusive, and it is designed to reach students who aren't typically tapped for leadership positions on campus. Despite this, CFA and PGI have took note in our observations of the process over the last 4 years of implementation that participation really varies greatly among the student body. And this is what we refer to as the concentric circles of participation. So in any process on a school campus, you really have 3 different circles where students are engaging. The innermost circle is comprised of that steering committee. So it's typically about 20 to 30 students on campus. And these students are designing the process, they're proposing ideas, they're organizing activities throughout the year. They're really deliberating on which ideas should move forward into the proposal development phase, and they're researching those projects and they're selecting which proposals move forward. They're charged with communicating with the rest of the student body about the different projects that are on the ballot, and then of course they vote in the final election as well for which project will be implemented. So they really have the most concentrated engagement with the process throughout the year. In the second or the middle circle, we have a group of students who may propose ideas, they may campaign for projects that they really like that are on the ballot, they may show up for a steering committee meeting or two, and then they participate in the vote as well. And then in the third and the largest circle, which comprises majority of the student body, those students participate on the vote day. So they have the least touch points with the process. So CFA, alongside with the Participatory Governance Initiative, PGI, really began our journey to increase inclusivity in the process with bringing as many students from that outer concentric circle into those innermost circles so that they can have more touch points with the process throughout the year and hopefully have higher impact in terms of civic outcomes as well. So we piloted the inclusive model back in 2019-2020, so last academic year, with Carson Junior High out of Mesa Public Schools. Really with the focus, one, of bringing those students into those two innermost concentric circles, but also with real intention to engage students with disabilities on the student steering committee and in every aspect of the PB process. So Carson Junior High has about 1,200 students on their campus with a significant overrepresentation of minority students when compared to the demographics of the total city. And about 18% of Carson students are enrolled in special education programs. In the pilot, about 40% of the students on the steering committee had a documented disability. And we were able to engage the entire student body through idea collection, deliberation, the school-wide vote. We also produced a toolkit in that first year that has 5 promising practices for inclusive engagement that I'll share a bit about more in just a bit on the next slide, I believe. So this academic year, 2020-2021, we're still working with Carson Junior High, and we're actually trying out a new model, a classroom approach model, where every single student on the steering committee has a documented disability. In addition to that, we're also bringing the lessons learned in the pilot year with Carson Junior High to 2 high schools in Sunnyside Unified School District, which is located in Tucson, Arizona. So in this second year, we're engaging about 12,000 students across the 3 campuses in inclusive school PB. And in addition to testing out what those promising practices look like at the high school level with those 2 schools in Sunnyside, we're also learning how to implement inclusive school PB in a virtual setting as well. So we're hopeful, and we plan on adding to the toolkit of promising practices from year 1 with some of those insights and lessons learned around virtual engagement as well. So as I mentioned and promised, we'll talk a little bit about the promising practices in this toolkit, which is available for download on our website at arizonafuture.org, and I'll show at the end of the presentation a resource slide where you can access that. The first promising practice coming out of that pilot year was really to ensure campus representation in that steering committee or in leadership groups on campus. So in Carson, the steering committee student demographics were really representative of Carson Junior High's overall demographics, with special education and several race demographics overrepresented, since these groups, as I mentioned before, are typically underrepresented in electoral engagement. The steering committee was formed through a combination of student selection, teacher referrals that were provided by both the social studies and special education departments. The students really worked to recruit other students to the steering committee on the school's morning announcements. The steering committee information meeting was announced for all students to attend, so it wasn't exclusive. We really wanted to make sure that any student that wanted to participate had the opportunity to do so. We started out with about 40 students that were interested in that initial information meeting, and then we had 32 students that were on that steering committee for the entire year-long process, 13 of which were students with a documented disability. And we really found that by ensuring the demographic representation on the steering committee, that the ideas that we collected were more reflective and responsive to the broader student body's needs, which is really exemplified again by that winning project of a school therapy dog in that pilot year. The second promising practice to ensure inclusion was to ensure inclusion of the broader student body to the SPB process by implementing opportunities for information sharing, deliberation, dialogue through a core curriculum classroom. So in Carson, steering committee students presented to their peers to collect ideas, to deliberate on the pros and cons of the projects, discuss voting logistics, and support the creation of visual artifacts at the various touch points throughout the process during the social studies classes. And that was because both 7th and 8th graders at Carson had to take social studies. So it was a way that we could really make sure that every single student was being touched at multiple points during the process. Promising Practice 3 really aimed to broaden participation through deliberation and collective decision making. So in addition to those classroom interventions that I described, we also created spaces for students to discuss the process, pros and cons, etc., by tabling at lunchtime. And we also implemented a school-wide primary vote. So this was a totally new addition to the process where this 281 initial ideas that were collected were whittled down to about 20. And then the entire student body used ranked choice voting to then continue to whittle that list of 20 ideas down to the top 5 ideas. So it was another opportunity to reach students at that point in the process, but it was also really exciting to kind of model the primary election processes that we all participate in real life too for students. So the fourth promising practice is really to ensure that the communication mediums that we used were inclusive to all learners. Throughout the process, the students on the steering committee created posters, they created videos and presentations to communicate with their peers. And during the tabling at lunch, students were also encouraged to draw pictures to depict their opinions on the process rather than just needing to speak up about them or write about them. They could be creative, they could draw pictures to depict those opinions. And finally, campaign and vote day materials were made accessible by utilizing larger fonts, illustrations, and pictures to depict each of the projects that were on that final ballot. Lastly, we really aim to increase inclusivity more broadly in a broader sense by engaging the entire school community. So during the vote, teachers and staff were invited to cast their ballots for which project they wanted to see funded alongside students. And then in alignment with the school astrology night, the broader school community of parents, of alumni, of siblings, of students that were at Carson were also able to participate in the PB election. And the steering committee took all the artifacts that were created throughout the process. So the poster boards with the pros and the cons, all the illustrations, the big butcher block pieces of paper that had the illustrations that were done during tabling, those were posted all around the gym and students could really walk through and they could see what the students did throughout the entire year to really experience what that process was like for them. So one of our goals with the toolkit and the promising practices was really that they reach beyond school participatory budgeting and can be adapted and applied in a variety of civic engagement and civic education settings to increase inclusivity broadly, but also, of course, students with disabilities as well, or people with disabilities as well. So with that, we really want to know from you, we have another poll. Which of these promising practices do you find most relevant or easy to replicate or apply for your own work? So I'll pause again for just a moment and have you guys respond to the poll using the poll EV link. I can drop it in the chat too for easy access. Wait just a minute. If you're having any trouble accessing the poll, let me know in the chat too. Oh, let's see. Well, that's okay. We can adapt on the fly. It seems like it might not be activating for some reason, but feel free. You can just respond. You can say promising practice 1 or just put a number in the chat and we can kind of see if there's a theme coming across. Looks like 3. Yeah, I like that one. Broaden participation through deliberation, collective decision making. Great. Well, it's always great to see which ones kind of seem most practical to be applied in a variety of settings. But it looks like almost everything is relevant, so that's awesome. Well, we'll go ahead, we'll move on. Sorry that the poll wasn't working there. And talk a little bit about our evaluation strategies and the outcomes that we saw after that initial pilot year with this project. So we've taken a youth participatory action research approach where students really work alongside researchers to evaluate the impact of the model. And through the YPAR methodologies, we've used a mixed methods approach to data collection, which included surveys, interviews with both teachers, staff, and students as well, focus groups, and also photo voice, which has participants take photographs to illustrate their experiences and is often supplemented by that interview or focus group or survey data. And these instruments are really, all of these instruments were really intended to evaluate student growth, learning, change relative to these 4 categories of civic indicators, what we call the CASP indicator survey, which is civic knowledge, attitudes, skills, and practices. This is the approach that we've used at Carson and that we're also implementing with the 2 high schools in Sunnyside this academic year as well. So these are some of the project outcomes that we saw from that first pilot year with Carson Junior High. We really found that students made important and significant gains and improvements in regards to those civic CASP indicators. So growth in their knowledge around participatory democracy and understanding of how systems work within their school and decisions are made. Really their attitudes towards one another, towards common good, etc. Their skills, their ability to really work together, and also their practices in civic engagement. We saw increases in self-advocacy, trust, communication, and solidarity, which really has led to a more inclusive and connected school community on campus. And importantly, we really found that school PB provided a place for students who wouldn't normally have the opportunity to do so, to work together and to build friendships and to really share in those leadership roles on the steering committee as well. So before I turn over to the resources and we can have some discussion, I know Christy and I have some questions that we'd like to bounce around with you all on the call. I do want to leave you with some of these quotes from some of the teachers and students that were engaged in the Carson process. So the top 3 that you see there are from students that were engaged. And one student said that PB makes them feel more important because they get to help make decisions on campus. I like this one about kind of building that agency and self-confidence. At first I was nervous, but now I know that I can do it. And lastly, I learned to advocate for myself because I knew I had a good idea. So that really showcases the growth that students experience during this process at their school. And these bottom two are highlights from some of the social studies teachers that assisted in the implementation of the model. One says the students felt especially empowered, especially those 7th grade students. And there was great and supportive interaction between students with disabilities and the general population. And lastly, I saw students develop stronger social skills and form friendships with students outside of their normal friend groups. So before we jump into discussion, I just want to leave you with a couple of resources. That toolkit that I mentioned with the inclusive practices that goes into a great detail of what we were able to accomplish at Carson is available for download on our website at arizonafuture.org. For free, you can just go on and click download the PDF and you can have it. And then secondly, we're preparing to launch a school PB workshop that is a professional development course designed for educators this summer, June 15th of 2021. And if you're interested in being on the email invite for that and receiving more information, you can contact me. My email address is down here, or you can drop your email in the chat and I'll be sure to follow up with you as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I know we want to jump into some discussion with you all. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Madison. Well, we know that we shared a lot of content with you all today. As you can see, we're very passionate about this work and feel really strongly about the impact that it's having on students. But as Madison really reinforced, this being an effective tool to really prepare young people to be engaged for the long term in civic life. We wanted to have some time for discussion. I have a few questions that I will put in the chat that can help guide us. Also, if you have questions or are just interested in understanding a little bit more about what it looks like to potentially bring this to your organization, school district, or a partner school community, we'd be happy to answer those too. As Madison shared, it's a really, the part of the beauty of PB is it's a really malleable process that can be brought to all kinds of different settings and can be really applied with a lot of different focus areas. So it may be that you are working with a community-based organization, with a city or town, municipal setting where PB could also apply, and we'd be happy to share a little bit more about that. So seeing a couple questions come in. Great question. So has there been any research done on the effects of school PB on things like absences or graduation rates? That's an excellent question and really on point with the kind of research that we hope to continue to do to understand the links between participation in school PB and other academic and social outcomes. I'm going to see if Madison has an immediate thought on existing data. And I also want to make sure to acknowledge our partner, Daniel Shagrinsky, who's here from the ASU Participatory Governance Initiative, who's really our amazing partner on all things research related to PB. So feel free to jump in, Danielle, on that question. And then I'll put our other prompts for discussion in the chat. But Madison, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that that's something that we're really interested in better understanding in terms of overall impact on school climate. So not just, you know, the relationship building that happens through PB, but exactly that. What are kind of the concrete indicators of school climate that we might see school PB driving the needle on? So graduation rates, absences. I'm curious, I know Danielle has been closely engaged with the Phoenix Union model this year that's really focused on school safety. So not to put him on the spot if he wants to jump in and see if that's something that, you know, is kind of in the pipeline for that research, but it might be something that they're looking at pretty closely as they're kind of evaluating, is school PB this model where they're reimagining what school safety looks like on those campuses? Is that like an indicator that they might be looking at in that process? So I don't see him coming off mute immediately. So maybe in the chat, he'll answer, but nonetheless, it's definitely something that's on our minds for future research and something that we want to be learning more about.
And just to add to that too, part of our research questions, and we would love to hear from you all. I just entered some questions in the chat, which I'll touch on in just a second, but if from the research and evaluation front, would love to hear thoughts on that too, of what sparks your interest from what we've shared, or what do you think would be useful to really dig in more deeply with. I think alongside those kinds of connections to academic and social outcomes, we're really interested in long-term measurement of civic behavior. So looking at, a group of young people who have come through this process over a period of time, what has the shift in their likelihood of engagement in civic and community life look like? One way that we plan to measure that is through looking at the students who are registered to vote, connected to these PB vote days. As Madison shared, we've had about 4,500 new voters for Arizona registered through the participatory budgeting vote days, and are really interested in then looking at, are those students more likely then to turn out? Were they more likely to vote in the last election and coming elections? With that premise that having gone through the voting process, really learned the power of their own voice, learned how the mechanics work, and feel comfortable with the process, are they actually more likely to turn out as well as be registered? So those are the kinds of things that we're really interested in. I want to give a shout out to Gregory, who I'm so excited to see, because I know we've connected with you before at the Public Allies trainings as well, and see that he's in the chat. So feel free to chime in. We'd love to chat with you too about maybe bringing this to the school where you're working, Gregory. And any reactions from the group, whether things that stand out to you as promising about the participatory budgeting model, and particularly the inclusive focus, areas that we need to pay attention to. So from what you heard today, are there things that we should be focused on more in the future? And then anything else you'd like to share, if there are other civic learning tools or strategies you think could be relevant. And I see we have a question from Michelle, so please jump in.
Yes, I'm used to be in education, but I'm not any longer. And I love what this represents, and I wish I'd been able to do it when I was teaching. But I'm now with AmeriCorps in a program called Caring Circles, which is out of the Area Agency on Aging. Is this something that could be adapted for something like Caring Circles to use in decision making, instead of it being from the top trickling down, that we could kind of trickle back up?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. And I think that's part of the power of participatory budgeting as a decision-making tool, is that it can be used in many different settings. So there have been applications that are kind of a similar model, like participatory grant making is another term that people use, where foundations and other funders have really engaged community buy-in and input more in that decision making. What's unique about participatory budgeting from my view is that it's really a full, a broadly shared vote and deliberative process where anyone impacted in that community, whether it's in a school community, in the case where we're working, or in a town, or in some cases nationally in other places, has the opportunity to have a say, whether that's submitting an idea for consideration, making their vote heard and where the dollars get spent, but bringing that into all kinds of different settings as really a way to share decision-making power and to make sure that residents and constituents are really authentically engaged. I think it has a lot of potential. And then Daniel and Madison, please chime in or correct that too.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's spot on. And it's also something that I really love about the PB process, is just how malleable it is in terms of setting, scope, timeline, budget. Really, all of those pieces can be adapted to fit the setting and the community in which the process is intended to serve. So it can be done, in our case, in the school setting over the course of a year, but it also could be done like really quickly in a month if you wanted to do the process that fast. I think the key component of participatory budgeting that makes it so impactful, I think, for folks that are engaged in it, is that there's real dollars attached to the process. So it steers away from tokenism or just consultation. It's really direct decision-making power, and whatever you choose to do with those dollars within the bounds of, those parameters that are set forward, you get to implement. But with that being said, the budget is really a key piece of that. I've seen budgets come together for PB in really creative ways. It's not always, a top level decision maker that's saying, I've heard about PB and I'm going to allocate this portion of the budget that I oversee. sometimes, it's really community members or constituents that are advocating for their voices to be heard in this type of process. I'm working with a teacher through the Global Mentorship Program outside of Arizona, and they were working with a really small budget, like $300 to decide upon. And he knew that he really needed to grow that budget for it to be a meaningful process. And so what they did is the students on the steering committee, they went to the different department heads in their campus that had access to discretionary funds, and they basically fundraised for PB. They presented on the process, shared some of the initial ideas of what they would do through it and the impact that it would have on their school community, and they were able to raise an additional $1,000 for their process by doing that. So there's creative ways that you can pull together budgets. We've also done like the tax credit for schools. You can donate, if you have a school that wants to do this and you have parents that are willing or teachers that are willing to donate a tax credit towards PB, you could raise funds in that way as well.
So are there other kind of questions? And Gregory, particularly you're coming from a school setting. So if you have any thoughts or questions on kind of what it might look like in your school, would welcome to hear that, or reactions to these prompts of, does anything stand out to you that we might be missing, or that you could see an additional layer of focus being helpful either in the implementation or in the research? We welcome input on that too.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm still looking over the toolkit that you have on the website. So I just downloaded it, and I'll probably share it. I'll share this video, and I'll make sure to share it with the supervisor of the school as well. And I can say that I like the outcomes, and I also like the different approaches to the different practices to making sure that that students with disabilities are included in the decision-making process. I can say that that for this school, like it could really benefit it could benefit the school as we are fully inclusive, meaning that all our students who have disabilities are in the general ed classroom. So like we don't have any separate classrooms, but like we made sure that that all students with disabilities here have an opportunity to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then just here at this campus, we had updated our sensory room, and I was actually part of that project because this is actually a project I did for the Public Allies program that I'm a part of. So that's one of the things that we're doing this year. And then I'm also teaching a unit on disability and equity at the high school level as well. And I'm also creating a document on equity for the staff members as well. So these are just different projects that I have. And then I would actually like to see if I can get participatory budgeting included. I would say I would like to, so we have two schools. We have the K-6 elementary school, and then our new high school for grades 7 through 12. So this is probably something that would definitely be a benefit to all high schoolers, and including those who have disabilities as well. Again, based off what I heard and how it's like some of the responses that they feel more important and they learn to advocate for themselves. And I mean, that's what I have to comment on that. And then just really quick, since I am still part of the Public Allies program, so this is something that can be used towards schools, but can it also be, and I think this is something Michelle had said, but could it also be used like for something for any AmeriCorps program in terms of if it's possible to use a budgeting program to help figure out, I mean, it's just something that they could practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really exciting thought and a great question. I think there's a lot of creative ways we could think about that, whether with kind of community partners, with community members, working with AmeriCorps members to go through kind of a PB process. I think that's really neat and exciting to think about. And thanks for your thoughts on the school setting too. We'll definitely be following up with you because I know you're exactly the right person to be talking to about maybe bringing that to that school. And you touched on a couple of really important things that Madison covered as well, but just to put a finer point on it, we were really, really struck by the relationship building across the board in PB that happens, whether it's peer-to-peer relationship building, particularly with the inclusive focus of really having a space where students who otherwise might not be tapped for formal leadership roles like in student government are already kind of playing those leadership roles. PB has provided, I think, a really great space to widen that reach and to make sure students who haven't yet been tapped or called upon see themselves as leaders, are seen as leaders, and can build those relationships across a school community, as well as the trust and relationship building with leaders. So Madison touched on this with why the budget part is so important, that it's an authentic sharing of decision-making and of control. And in doing that, we've just seen really amazing kind of trust built between students and school staff, district administrators, and greater communication kind of flowing between students and leaders in that way. So I've been excited to see it as really a way to connect communities in addition to kind of that formal civic participation. Are there other reactions, kind of questions, comments of things we should be paying attention to, or kind of what stands out to you? We'd love to hear, and feel free to enter either in the chat or to come off mute and to share as well. Any others? All right. Well, if we don't hear any other questions or comments, then I think we'll just bring it back to what Madison shared, that we have the toolkit available. She put that in the chat as well to really dig in more deeply and understand what the implementation looks like for this model. All of the data on the civic health progress meters and our progress meters across the board we have available on our website, hopefully as resources for you all. Would encourage you, if that data is useful in helping make the case for the really important work that you're doing in illuminating opportunities or challenges that we can be addressing in civic engagement and civic life. And to just reiterate that we are really open to and excited about exploring new ways of approaching participatory budgeting. So Michelle would love to chat with you about what that could look like in that setting. Any others on the call who are listening in and have questions or need clarification or just want to think creatively about like what could this model look like in a school setting or outside of a school setting, we are really excited and happy to do that brainstorming. And I know that we are not closing out all the way because our colleagues have some closing business for us as a workshop. So I don't want to fully send you off, but I think I'll stop there. Madison, is there anything else you would add?
No, thank you so much.
Really quick, what was the date of that workshop in June?
Yeah, June 15th. I'll pop it in the chat, and then Gregory, I'll make sure I took a note of your email address, and I'll be sure to follow up with you too with that invitation so you can get registered for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Let's give a big round of applause to Christy and Madison for sharing such an important process on how we can engage individuals at our own organizations in real decision-making processes. It could have to do with the budgeting, like Christy and Madison both gave the examples of. Also things like policies and interview processes and other things that we've seen in some other workshop panels, the one with Public Allies yesterday on analyzing our processes to make sure that they're accessible to folks from all communities. Also our presentation on Monday, re-examining our recruitment process to make sure we're diversifying our volunteer and member pool. So I am loving the overlap between workshops, and I'm so excited that many of you have been in most of these workshops and can start to pull all of these threads together.